12 years ago, a magical genius was brutally murdered in a ruthless struggle for power. Now she has returned in the body of a young child, wielding not one, but two star relics with devastating power. What will little Roseanne do to exact her bloody revenge against the killer who still freely wields her stolen treasures? Roseanne was stunned, unable to believe her ears at the news she had just received. She asked her older brother to repeat his words one more time to make sure she hadn't misheard. Kalian, with a slightly pensive expression, began to explain things in more detail to his sister. He informed her that he had unintentionally caught the Emperor's attention. Roseanne was horrified to hear the title of that king, who was infamous for his bizarre hobby of collecting handsome young men from all over and bringing them to the palace. In her imagination, he was a pervert building a harem of men in the deepest chambers of his castle. Kalian calmly confirmed that this was entirely true, making Roseanne cry out that now was no time for joking. She jumped to her feet and asked whether he had any idea how frightening and dangerous that palace was. Roseanne reminded her brother that he needed to be far more careful and guard his radiant good looks. Kalian was bewildered, not understanding what was wrong with his face, while the dazzling aura of his handsomeness nearly blinded Roseanne. The records confirmed that even the Emperor had been captivated by the beauty of this man named Kalian Winiak. He was a precious family member to Roseanne, and the heir of the distinguished Winiak family, renowned for its illustrious tradition of swordsmanship. Roseanne recalled how, 3 years ago, she had become family with him despite sharing no blood. In truth, she was a reincarnated soul, someone who had already died once in a past life. Unlike the usual reincarnation tropes where one is reborn as a noble lady, she had once been an orphan struggling to survive day by day in the bitter cold of winter. On a snowy day, she happened to come across Kalian when he was in trouble. She heard a cry for help coming from his direction and could not bring herself to ignore such a sight. Thanks to her innate talent for swordsmanship from her past life, Roseanne picked up a staff and stood to protect the stranger. The staff in her hand blazed with a brilliant and powerful light. Roseanne single-handedly struck down the attackers surrounding them and rescued Kalian from his perilous situation. Ever since becoming a member of the Winiak family under the name Josie, she had devoted herself wholeheartedly to worrying over her brother. Kalian smiled, saying her recollection was a little off from the truth. He teased that, after all, hadn't Josie decided to follow him home to the Winiaks that day because she had been drawn in by his good looks? Roseanne broke into a cold sweat as she recalled the truth, that she had indeed been lured into following him the moment she saw his handsome face. Kalian noted with gratitude that, after 3 years, it was actually he who had received her help in so many different ways. He advised his little sister not to worry too much, since after all, he had lived a total of 29 years counting his previous life. Roseanne ate her cake as she played, all the while insisting that she absolutely had to worry because her brother was far too naive. Though he was the heir of a swordsman family, Kalian was frail, utterly lacking in stamina, and hopelessly clueless when it came to the affections of women. He calmly held a large bouquet of flowers given to him by the villagers, completely oblivious to their hidden feelings or admiration for him. Roseanne asked about the timing of the meeting with the Emperor, and Kalian told her they would meet at the Delphian River on the night of tomorrow's festival. She panicked, imagining her brother being devoured whole by that terrifying old Emperor. To Roseanne, Kalian was the savior who had kept her from starving to death by the roadside years ago. And so she swore she would protect her brother's purity from the Emperor's clutches at any cost. A few hours later, she was still racking her brain for a way to stop this fateful meeting. She considered every possible option, even praying that one of the two would suddenly fall ill so the appointment would be cancelled. Suddenly, she spotted Kalian strolling alone in the distance. She noticed her brother was in a state of complete obliviousness to everything around him. A bold and somewhat violent idea popped into the little girl's head. She told herself that in this situation, the simplest and surest method was the most effective. Her plan was simply to knock her brother out once so he would be unable to go meet the Emperor. She silently apologized to him, convinced that this act was entirely for his own good. Roseanne took a running start and launched into a decisive charge. Gripping her wooden sword, she swung with all her might straight at her brother. But Kalian suddenly bent down out of curiosity about a flower, causing her strike to slice through empty air. He then became absorbed in chasing a butterfly, making every one of Roseanne's follow-up attacks miss completely. Some knights nearby happened to see this and praised the little girl for her diligent training, even while she was in a neighboring country. One knight remarked that despite her small size, Roseanne wielded a sword like a true monster, with formidable skill. Roseanne, gasping for breath, simply could not understand what on earth was happening to her. She fumed, wondering why a swordsmanship genius like herself couldn't land a single hit on her brother. Suddenly, Callian cried out in pain, making Roseanne freeze and stop. She rushed over in alarm, asking whether something serious had happened to him. Callian, on the verge of tears, held up his finger, stung by a bee, for his sister to see with the most pitiful expression. Roseanne sighed and grumbled that this was exactly what happened whenever he was left alone without her to watch over him. Callian smiled warmly and said that was precisely why he always had to worry about his little sister. Roseanne tenderly cared for him and bandaged the wound on her brother's finger. Once again, she earnestly begged him not to go meet that emperor. When Callian asked why, she warned that no one could predict what the old man might do to him. He pouted and asked whether he really was so untrustworthy, leaving Roseanne flustered. In the end, Roseanne relented, but only after making her brother memorize her rules for self-defense. She instructed that if anyone touched him without permission, he was to resist with all his strength. If that person still refused to stop, he was to aim straight for their weak points. And most importantly, if his opponent was stronger than him, he was to call out the name Josie at once. The two siblings happily high-fived to seal the deal after Callian agreed to all his sister's demands. That night, Roseanne still lay tossing and turning in bed, unable to shake her endless worries. She revealed that she had secretly engraved a binding spell on Callian so she could locate him if he called her name. At first, she reassured herself that she could finally go to sleep in peace. But her intuition warned her of something ominous, and she sprang up, feeling she could not rest so easily after all. Roseanne decided to cast a sleeping spell on her brother to ensure his absolute safety. She believed that if she kept him fast asleep until morning, every problem would be solved. She crept into her brother's room, promising herself she would be very gentle so as not to hurt him. But she was stunned to find the bed empty and the blankets already cold. Roseanne was shocked to realize that her brother had vanished from the room at some point. She looked out the window in a panic, wondering where he could possibly have gone in the dead of night. Meanwhile, in another dark corner, a groan of pain echoed through the air. Callian sat calmly atop a pile of guards he had effortlessly defeated. He privately thought how troublesome it would be if his body got scratched or marked in any way. His little princess at home would surely fly into a rage and worry endlessly. The scene shifted to the estate of the Fidel family in the Delphian Empire, where an important conference among the families was taking place. Roseanne was sneaking through the night and very nearly got caught by a patrol. Luckily, she found a large bush to hide in and slipped past the encirclement. She was determined to find her brother before anything terrible could happen. Roseanne stopped before a large iron gate and began calculating how to get past it. She reminded herself to move very quietly so as not to make a single sound. Suddenly, a strange voice rang out, calling her an adorable little rabbit, startling her in terror. A loud rustling came from the bushes right behind her. Roseanne was startled when a white rabbit suddenly leaped out from its hiding spot. The sudden noise made her tumble over, creating a racket that disturbed the entire area. The guards nearby heard the strange noise and immediately grabbed their weapons and rushed over to check. They surrounded her and demanded to know who she was and what she was doing sneaking around this forbidden area. Roseanne was deeply worried, as her plan for a silent infiltration had completely fallen apart. Noticing that the guards seemed unsteady on their feet, she tried to greet them, but they immediately denied everything. Roseanne solemnly warned that if they forced her to resort to violence, they would surely regret it. Ignoring her warning, the guards lunged to attack, forcing her into a battle-ready stance. She hesitated, unsure whether she should truly strike these men with full force. In a moment of confusion and distraction, Roseanne suddenly slipped and fell backward. At that critical moment, with disaster hanging by a thread, a steady hand caught her by the shoulder just in time. Roseanne was stunned to realize she had narrowly escaped a painful fall by a hair's breadth. An elegant gentleman appeared, rebuking the guards for treating a guest so rudely. He gently asked after the little girl, checking whether she was hurt or in pain anywhere. As their master, he stepped forward on the guard's behalf to offer her a sincere apology. The man introduced himself as Luis Fidel, the head of the distinguished Fidel family. Roseanne felt the name Luis sounded rather familiar. Seeing the treasured sword on the girl, Luis suspected she was a disciple of the Winiak family. He mocked Rosianne's excitement at visiting Delphian for the first time, then told the little runt to go back to her room and rest. Luis bluntly pressed her for Callion's whereabouts, while Rosianne wondered what the head of the Fidel family was doing here. Both of them were well aware of the law forbidding the masters and heirs of transcendent families from meeting in private. Silence fell as both displayed their displeasure at the other's attitude. Luis calmly claimed to be Callion's friend, though his face clearly betrayed that he was lying. He even sneered, saying that Callion was hardly the type to make enemies of anyone. Luis declared that if the little girl wouldn't talk, he would go find the family head himself to ask. He threatened to report that a disciple of the Winiak family was lurking suspiciously within the estate, which alarmed Rosianne. Afraid of trouble if the matter came to light, Rosianne reluctantly admitted that Callion was not in the estate. Luis was very surprised to learn that the target he was searching for was not there. He grew irritated, assuming Callion had gone off causing trouble again, while Rosianne couldn't understand why he was suddenly angry. Luis's face revealed a mysterious, calculating look. Rosianne suddenly recalled that his Fidel family also belonged to the ranks of the transcendent families. This family was renowned for their ability to transform into beasts and use their own bodies as terrifying weapons. An idea came to the little girl, and she began to smile with a knowing look. Rosianne curiously asked Luis which kind of animal he usually turned into when using his power. He confirmed that every member of the Fidel family could change their form. Rosianne excitedly imagined Luis as an incredibly cool Black Panther who could find Callion in the blink of an eye. Luis was utterly speechless at the little girl's vivid imagination. Rosianne was certain he was about to go look for Callion, and she very much wanted to tag along. The little girl quickly grabbed hold of the hem of Luis's clothes. With sparkling eyes, Rosianne pleaded with him to take her along. She used the excuse that she was worried Callion would be in danger from those plotting to harm him. Rosianne played her part so well that Luis could only watch in silence. But right afterward, she casually told him to just forget about it. Luis sighed and explained that, as the heir of a transcendent family, Callion was more than capable of protecting himself. He added that the help of a little kid like Rosianne would only wound Callion's pride. Rosianne was furious at being looked down on, even though she had humbled herself to ask so politely. Without another word, the little girl leaped onto Luis's back, making him jump in shock. Rosianne clung to him tightly and insisted she would surely be of use on the journey. Ignoring Luis's demand that she let go, Rosianne quickly activated a transformation spell on him. A blinding light enveloped them both right there by the city wall. Luis angrily scolded the little girl, calling her an impudent brat. Meanwhile, Rosianne was thrilled, eager to witness the true power of the head of the Fidel family. Elsewhere, Callion sat waiting leisurely, predicting that Rosianne was about to realize something. Regina suddenly appeared after sensing the powerful surge of sword energy emanating from the scene. She demanded to know from Callion whether this was an official declaration of war from the Kingdom of Abbey. Callion laughed it off, denying it and explaining that he had merely been acting in self-defense. He wondered whether the Emperor was secretly sending people to hunt him down. Callion narcissistically wondered whether his beauty had made the Emperor determined to capture him and bring him to the palace. He began to speculate about the young king's deeper schemes. Callion suspected he was being brought into the Emperor's harem to serve as a sacrifice for some ritual. His eyes suddenly flashed with a cold, dangerous glint. Callion declared that the Emperor was truly after a star relic, which astonished Regina. He wore a triumphant, self-assured smile. Regina's reaction only reinforced his belief that his deduction was completely correct. Back with Luis, he had now transformed into a mighty Black Panther racing through the forest. He irritably called Rosianne an annoying little brat of the Winiak family. Luis wondered why the little girl kept grinning with such satisfaction the whole way. Rosianne teased that she had always assumed he would be much more mature. But in reality, Luis was still in the middle of growing up, looking noticeably smaller than a full-grown Black Panther. Struck where it hurt, Luis flew into a rage and scolded the girl for knowing nothing about the dignity of a family head. He also wondered to himself why he had suddenly transformed before officially coming of age. Luis told himself he would have to intensify his training once he returned, all while finding Rosianne thoroughly bothersome. He realized that if he didn't bring her along, this stubborn girl would surely go off searching for Callion on her own anyway. Rosianne eagerly cheered for the two of them to cooperate, but Luis just wanted her to keep quiet and leave him in peace. They had traveled quite a long way from the estate. Luis complained that if he weren't burdened with carrying a heavy little kid, he would have moved much faster. Roseanne took offense at being called heavy, insisting that was no way to speak to a lady. Luis scoffed at the little girl's claim to being a lady, saying she was just holding a grudge over what he'd said earlier. They suddenly stopped when both of them sensed that something was off. Luis could feel Kalyan's mana radiating powerfully from beneath the city. Roseanne worried that the area was far too vast to pinpoint their target accurately. The little girl suddenly froze when she heard someone calling her name. Roseanne realized that the spell she had once cast on Kalyan was beginning to respond. The Black Panther Luis immediately picked up speed, racing off according to the girl's directions. Luis grumbled at being treated by the little kid like nothing more than a horse-drawn carriage. Roseanne confidently declared that she now knew Kalyan's exact location. Meanwhile, Kalyan mockingly called the Emperor a fool for unwittingly revealing where the relic was hidden. Regina realized that this man had deliberately let his mana leak in order to lure her into revealing herself. She privately judged him to be far more dangerous than he appeared. Regina wondered why the heir of the Winiak family was rumored to be a weakling. As the head of the Kilgus family, she decided she would not let him leave so easily. Knowing that Kalyan was after a star relic, she prepared to take action. Regina declared that she would erase his memory of everything that had happened that day. Kalyan suddenly appeared right behind her with blinding speed and said that was a terrible idea. He whispered into her ear that the relic had belonged to him all along. Regina was stunned by his speed and his sudden appearance. A cold blade was already pressed against her throat before she even realized it. Kalyan spoke of death as casually as if it were an inevitable part of life. He even cruelly asked whether she would have any regrets if she had to depart a little sooner than planned. Regina could feel the thick, utterly genuine killing intent radiating from this young man. A mysterious figure observed from afar and judged that Kalyan still had much to learn. Regina was stunned by his terrifying power and wondered who this monster truly was. She tried to warn him of the grave consequences of attacking the head of a transcendent family. It would surely ignite a brutal war. Kalyan coldly retorted that he couldn't care less about such a thing. A surge of energy erupted as his sword plunged into the ground. Right afterward, Kalyan changed his attitude and said he had only been playing around. He wore a fake smile, claiming that he too had no fondness for war. Regina watched him warily, unsure of what he was truly scheming. Kalyan proposed that they both pretend nothing had happened, since it wasn't honorable for a whole group to gang up on one person. He sensed the presence of someone drawing near. Looking off into the distance, Kalyan murmured that he was standing here waiting for Roseanne. Regina was utterly speechless, concluding that this young man truly had something wrong with his head. She intended to seize the chance to quietly retreat from the scene. But Kalyan quickly stopped her and put forward a proposal, a promise between the two of them. Kalyan stood amid the ruins of the battlefield and thought to himself that this compromise wasn't a bad deal for Regina at all. He began clearing the scene to erase every trace. Kalyan even came up with the idea of inflicting a few wounds on his own body to make his act more convincing. Just then, Roseanne came rushing in, calling out to her brother with a look of utter panic. The little girl looked deeply worried at the sight before her. Roseanne frantically asked what had happened here. She feared her brother had been injured in the recent clash. Kalyan gently called out his sister's name when he saw her appear. He immediately threw his arms around Roseanne and confessed how terrified he had been without her by his side. Holding her tightly, Kalyan feigned weakness as he asked who had dared to bully his little rabbit. He squeezed his arms around her as if to shield the little girl from all danger. Roseanne looked displeased as she glanced toward the figure collapsed in the distance. The little girl accused that man of claiming to be one of the Emperor's knights while trying to lay his hands on her. Roseanne recounted how she had fought back by kicking him in the groin, then got lost because she couldn't find the way out. After telling the story, Roseanne still hadn't recovered from the shock of what she had been through. The little girl suddenly sensed a strange surge of mana, yet heard no suspicious sound. Luis suddenly appeared and asked why Roseanne hadn't called him sooner, while the girl insisted she had never believed he would actually come to her rescue. Kalyan continued to cuddle and praise Roseanne as the most precious treasure of his life. Luis Fidel stood watching with a mocking gaze, unable to believe what he was seeing. He demanded to know from Kalyan what on earth he had done at this scene. Luis insisted he could sense sword energy thick in the air everywhere, not merely a single kick as the little girl had claimed. Roseanne immediately defended her brother and asked Luis why he was interrogating Kalyan so harshly. Kalian calmly told his sister not to mind Luis's grumbling. He even pretended to be friendly, greeting Luis as if they were old, close friends. Kalian's fake attitude made Luis feel utterly frustrated and uncomfortable. Luis turned and called the little girl a runt, which left Rosianne very indignant. He remarked that the way she treated Kalian was nothing like an ordinary disciple at all. Rosianne proudly declared that she was the youngest genius ever to be granted the distinguished Winiac name. Luis dismissed it as an absurd lie that anyone could see through at once. Kalian suddenly pretended to have a headache as a way to shake off Luis and end the conversation. He played the part so convincingly that Rosianne anxiously asked whether he felt faint or nauseous. The little girl hurriedly helped him along and told Luis to discuss matters another time, as her brother needed to rest. Before leaving, Kalian shot a cold glance back, warning Luis never to bother his sister again. Luis could only stand there in stunned silence, watching the two Winiac siblings walk away. After they left, the old estate fell into quiet stillness. Regina appeared and asked Luis whether Kalian had truly silenced every loose end. The lady head of the Kilguess family admitted she had no excuse left for this oversight. She revealed that the memories of both the Emperor and the Captain of the Guard had been wiped clean to keep the day's events secret. Luis felt that, while these terms seemed harsh, they were acceptable for the time being, until the next opportunity. Regina still couldn't stop worrying, wondering whether this was truly the only way to resolve the matter. She pondered in contemplation how Owen Winiac had concealed a true monster under the title of heir all this time. Regina pressed Luis about the true identity of the little girl who had been with Kalian. Luis reiterated that she seemed to be nothing more than a disciple granted the Winiac name. Regina judged that despite her young age, the girl must surely be a formidable master to have been granted the name of a transcendent family. She suspected that the child's mana bore a shape strikingly similar to the distinctive mana of the Kilguess family. The lady had stared intently at the scene with a deeply thoughtful expression. Her eyes flickered with doubt about Rosianne's true identity. Regina resolved to find a way to meet that child once more to get to the bottom of everything. Luis noted that Kalian was extremely protective of the girl, so getting close to her would be no easy task. An idea struck Regina, and she touched the box holding the invitation cards with a cryptic smile. She declared that she would invite the family head, the heir, and Rosianne of the Winiac family to attend a banquet at the royal palace. Back at the estate, a cup of hot cocoa sat ready on the table. The two siblings sat together, and Kalian gently asked whether his sister was feeling better. Kalian leaned in and told Rosianne to listen as he shared an important piece of information he had heard from the captain of the guard. He revealed that the Winiac family's star relic was being secretly hidden right inside the Delphian castle. Kalian smiled, noticing that Rosianne looked just as surprised as he was. Rosianne let it slip and asked whether he meant that old, broken sword. The girl's question made Kalian pause, astonished by his sister's knowledge. Rosianne immediately realized she had let something slip and tried to cover her embarrassment. Kalian was deeply surprised to learn that his sister knew so much about the state of the relic. Rosianne could only laugh it off, glossing over it by saying she just happened to know a lot of things. The girl quickly thought to blame it on having heard the information straight from Luis Fidel. Kalian immediately grew jealous and asked since when the two of them had become so close. He couldn't believe they were intimate enough to discuss even the secrets surrounding a star relic. Kalian pointed out that Rosianne had only met Luis for the first time that very day. He felt deeply hurt and suspected his sister wanted another older brother like Luis. Rosianne hurriedly denied it, not understanding how her brother could think something so strange. Kalian grew self-pitying, calling himself so weak that he couldn't even protect himself and only made his sister worry. Rosianne immediately reassured him, declaring that Kalian would always be her one and only most wonderful brother. Suddenly, Owen Winiac appeared with a stern expression, radiating authority as he called out the names of his two children. He scolded the two troublemakers and ordered them both to come to his office at once to talk. Owen sternly reminded them that he had told them again and again not to cause trouble while in a foreign land. Both Kalian and Rosianne flinched in fear before their father's fury. He tossed some letters onto the table and told the siblings to read the contents for themselves. Kalian was greatly surprised to recognize them as official invitations from the Delphian royal family. He wondered why the palace would send a personal invitation even to a child like Rosianne. Owen said he had heard about the siblings' clash with the head of the Fidel family that day. Rosianne hurriedly explained that Luis had actually helped her search for Kalian when she had gotten lost. Owen glared and warned that even a child must understand the need to be extremely cautious with other transcendent families. Roseanne bowed her head in apology, her face full of remorse before her father's sternness. Owen asked whether Louise had questioned her about Kalyan or about herself. The girl innocently replied that nothing in particular had happened, though deep down she was beginning to feel a flicker of doubt. Kalyan stepped forward to take full responsibility and begged his father not to scold Roseanne any further. He turned to his sister and told her to simply stay at the estate and ignore the royal invitation, for safety's sake. Roseanne couldn't believe her brother would make such a decision. She recalled how confident he had been the day before, only to be carried off so easily, and so she felt uneasy. The little girl resolutely raised her hand and declared that she too would attend the banquet, no matter what. Owen was stunned by his little daughter's sudden determination. Roseanne pleaded with her father to let her come along, for she could not allow her brother to fall into danger even one more time. Owen asked pensively why the girl felt it was truly necessary for her to go with them. Roseanne vowed that she would absolutely not cause any trouble during the entire trip to the palace. Owen ordered Roseanne to stay while Kalyan was told to step outside at once. The girl felt deeply uneasy at having to face the family head Owen's sternness alone. Kalyan also felt anxious and asked his father whether this private talk was truly necessary. He worried about what his father intended to discuss with his sister without him present. Owen shot his son a sharp look that made Kalyan feel the weight of the pressure. Kalyan had no choice but to quietly step outside, though his heart was full of worry for Roseanne. A loud thud sounded within the room, making the atmosphere unbearably tense. Owen disciplined Kalyan, scolding him for daring to defy his father's words. Roseanne anxiously asked after Kalyan when she saw him seemingly enduring pain. The little girl comforted him, telling her brother to go on ahead and not to worry, as she would come along shortly. Roseanne even whispered a promise to give him a goodnight kiss before he went to sleep. She even promised to sing his favorite lullaby, which moved Kalyan deeply. Watching the scene, Owen stood at a distance and sighed in dismay at how weak his son was. Kalyan quietly left to prepare for the meeting, leaving Roseanne wondering why he hadn't said goodbye to their father. The little girl stood there bewildered, unable to understand why her brother was acting so strangely today. Owen suddenly stepped closer and called out Roseanne's name. He sternly asked whether she understood why he had taken her in as a disciple and allowed her to live here. Roseanne was utterly bewildered, having no answer to such a sudden question. The girl wondered whether her father was reminding her to know her place, that she was only here thanks to Kalyan. Contrary to her expectations, Owen looked at her with a pensive gaze and said he was truly worried for her. Roseanne was taken aback, not understanding the true intent behind her father's cryptic words. She began to fear whether some danger lay in wait for her ahead. Owen looked at the little girl with a deeply serious expression. He pointed toward Kalyan and declared that he was the very person she needed to be most wary of. Roseanne was stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief that her beloved brother could be the one to guard against. Owen explained that Roseanne had a weakness. She was very fond of beautiful faces. And Kalyan knew this all too well, being the type who would readily use his looks to manipulate her. Roseanne laughed it off and told her father not to worry, for if Kalyan ever dared do such a thing, she would be the first to scold him. Owen sighed, thinking to himself that this girl was either too pure or too naive, then patted her head. He reiterated that Kalyan was not at all weak, but his mental state could sometimes be very unstable. And so he wanted her to always stay by his side. In return, the Winiak family would always be her support. Owen asked her to keep an eye on Kalyan so he wouldn't do anything strange at the palace. Roseanne was thrilled to learn she was allowed to go with her brother, and thanked her father profusely. Roseanne anxiously drew closer when she saw her brother gasping for breath. The little girl cried out his name in alarm, seeing that the situation looked far from well. Touching Kalyan's forehead, she realized he was running a very high fever. Roseanne was shocked, wondering whether today was the day that dreaded illness would flare up. Kalyan smiled weakly in response to his sister's concern. This was the symptom of star fever, a state of overload when the body cannot withstand the power of a transcendent entity. Kalyan's condition was especially severe, and the cycle of its flare-ups was highly erratic. Seeing her brother in pain, Roseanne took his hand and promised to sing the lullaby as she had planned. The little girl gently sang the lullaby, hoping he would sleep well and feel roses blooming in his mind. Kalyan felt immense relief and peace as he listened to his sister's singing. Roseanne secretly thought to herself that she was actually using a bit of magic to help calm him. Kalian asked whether she would promise to always stay by his side like this, forever. Roseanne smiled and assured him that as long as he needed her, she would never leave. The little girl watched to see whether he had truly fallen asleep. Roseanne told herself she couldn't keep handling these fevers by hand like this forever. However, she had a more important task to carry out right now. Meanwhile, Kalian remained lost in sleep, wearing a cryptic smile and the thought of keeping her by his side for life. The next day at the royal palace, the children were busy playing together. A strange boy appeared with an air of great confidence. It was Roseanne disguised as a male, which left Kalian astonished. He couldn't believe his sister could transform into such a flawless little boy. Roseanne playfully asked how she looked, whether she was good enough to make it into the emperor's harem. The girl's bold question left Kalian frozen in astonishment. Roseanne was secretly scheming, having heard that a Winiac star relic was hidden within the palace. She suspected it was kept in some extremely secret place that no one knew about. She reasoned that the emperor had brought Kalian here perhaps to use his power to stabilize that relic. As the true owner of the relic, Roseanne resolved to go and confirm it for herself. Kalian looked at his sister and silently praised her as a most precious and adorable little brother. Roseanne eagerly told her brother not to worry and to place his complete trust in her abilities. However, she also reminded herself that she needed more practice so as not to ruin the plan. Roseanne wondered how her brother had managed to recognize her, even though she had disguised herself so carefully with magic. Lost in thought, she was hit on the head by a flying ball, making her yelp in pain. The children demanded she kick the ball back to them, which she found utterly annoying. Roseanne irritably scolded the children that before asking for a favor, they should learn to apologize first. The little girl crossed her arms in exasperation, privately griping that children these days had no manners at all. Kalian patted his sister's head and gently asked whether she had been hurt by the collision. A woman passing by remarked that the two siblings looked so close. That comment surprised Roseanne and sparked a new idea. The little girl threw her arms around her brother's neck and declared that the two of them were the best siblings in the world. Kalian smiled happily, thinking to himself that he truly could never win against this little sister of his. Just then, a servant approached to announce that it was time for Kalian to attend the meeting. Owen appeared and scanned everywhere in search of Roseanne. He pointed in surprise at the boy before him and asked who this child was. Roseanne hurriedly explained that she had disguised herself to look stronger in order to protect her brother. Owen smiled with satisfaction, thinking to himself how reassuring his daughter's protectiveness was. Roseanne was pleased that her disguise had been such a complete success that even her father hadn't recognized her right away. The palace appeared in all its splendor as the whole family prepared to enter the important meeting. Owen reminded them that only the family head and the heir were allowed inside, so he asked her to wait outside. Kalian still couldn't stop worrying, asking whether his sister really intended to wear that outfit the entire time. All of a sudden, a voice rang out, calling Kalian's name affectionately. The emperor appeared with white hair and a radiant smile, expressing his delight that Kalian had come to the meeting. Roseanne was stunned to realize this emperor looked far younger than she had imagined. The young king offered a sincere apology for his discourteous actions the previous evening. He explained that he had merely wanted a quiet conversation with the heir of the Winiac family, but it had been misunderstood. The emperor suddenly took Kalian's hand, making Roseanne, standing beside them, jump in terror. He even suggested that next time the two of them should meet somewhere more private so they could spend more time together. The emperor promised to prepare everything according to Kalian's tastes, which made Roseanne extremely uneasy. Seeing her brother about to fall into the predator's hands, the little girl immediately leaped in to intervene. The emperor stared in surprise at the child who had just cut into his conversation. Roseanne used the excuse that her brother was very busy with the meeting and suggested the emperor take her along instead. The girl's bold proposal made the air around the palace seem to freeze. The emperor curiously asked whether this boy was also a member of the distinguished Winiac family. Roseanne clearly introduced herself, saying her current name was Anne Winiac. The king suddenly recalled the rumor that the Winiacs had taken in a child a few years back and confirmed that Anne was that child. He began to regard the girl with a calculating gaze and asked whether she was interested in the sacred chamber. The emperor praised the girl's exquisite appearance and said she would suit that place perfectly, making Roseanne privately curse him as a weirdo. Finally, he turned to ask Kalian whether he might borrow this little brother for a while. Kalian hesitated, glancing toward his sister to gauge her intentions. Rosianne signaled for him to place his absolute trust in her. Kalian smiled and nodded in agreement at his sister's resolve. He thought to himself that if it was Anne, everything would surely be fine, and entrusted her to the Emperor. The carriage glided off in the sunlight, leaving behind the schemes and machinations beginning to brew within the palace. The guard bowed respectfully in welcome and received the Emperor's order that no one, especially the important guests, was to be allowed inside. After receiving the order, he immediately set about guarding the door with the strictest vigilance. Rosianne, still in disguise, felt uneasy upon realizing she now had to go alone with the Emperor, without a single guard following. The little girl privately cursed this king as a pervert and wanted nothing more than to not be alone with him a moment longer. The Emperor confirmed the girl's name was Anne Winiak, making Rosianne flinch and admit it in fluster. He wore a cryptic smile and promised that something truly wonderful awaited her ahead. Though she played along outwardly, inwardly Rosianne was full of suspicion and on guard against his attitude. The Emperor began steering the conversation toward continental history and asked whether the girl had ever read these records back at the estate. He recalled the event after the First Continental War, when 3 of the 5-star relics had vanished and remained without a trace to this day. Rosianne privately judged the Emperor to be quite brazen for casually bringing this up while secretly holding one himself. History recorded that the star relics were weapons carrying the purest power of the stars. In the past, transcendent entities had waged devastating wars to seize them, and though the families now strove to maintain a balance, humanity's greed for power never truly disappeared. The Emperor gazed into the distance and admitted that he himself was no exception to this law of craving power. If he thought she hadn't seen through his wicked scheme, then he was gravely mistaken. She was determined never to let a perverted king like him have the chance to touch Kalian's purity or a star relic. As she walked, Rosianne nurtured her resolve to protect her brother and her family's treasure at any cost. The Emperor announced that they had arrived as they stood before a large, magnificent door. The moment the door opened, Rosianne was stunned to feel a powerful tremor rising from the ground beneath her feet. The little girl was awestruck by the brilliant light pouring out from within the secret chamber. The Emperor asked her to step closer to face what awaited inside. A mysterious voice rang out from within the radiance, asking the girl to show her face. Rosianne was astonished to recognize this as the Winiak family's star relic that had been lost for so long. Suddenly, the little girl felt her body grow weightless and begin to float in midair. A breathtakingly beautiful woman appeared, gently lifting the girl's chin and praising the child's beauty. However, the mysterious woman suddenly paused upon discovering something out of the ordinary. She immediately recognized that Rosianne was in fact a girl, not a boy, as her disguise suggested. Rosianne was speechless, unable to believe her true identity had been seen through so easily. In another development, Regina of the Kilges family was attending the gathering of the heads of the transcendent families. Dorian, head of the Layla family, suddenly expressed a desire to confess an important truth concerning the star relics. He sat in silent contemplation beneath the gazes of the other powerful family heads. Owen of the Winiak family asked whether he meant the resurrection crystal of the Layla family. Dorian broke into a cold sweat and admitted that the guess was entirely correct. He revealed the shocking information that the resurrection crystal had in fact been stolen 12 years ago. Regina slammed the table in anger, demanding why Dorian had only now decided to speak of such a grave matter. Kronos of the Elgiwa family was also greatly astonished by the 12-year mark Dorian had just mentioned. Dorian bowed his head in remorse, explaining that at first his family thought they could recover it themselves, but in the end, all efforts proved futile, forcing him to seek everyone's help. Regina held her head in dismay, unable to believe this secret had been kept hidden for such a long time. Owen turned to ask Kronos whether the eye of prophecy in his right eye could see the future and be of any help. Kronos silently raised a hand to cover his right eye with a pained expression. He confessed that if the resurrection crystal hadn't vanished, he might have found a way to solve his own problem. The entire room fell dead silent at the sight of Kronos' wretched condition. He revealed a long scar over his eye and recounted that he had been attacked by a monster, all the while waiting for the chance to use the crystal's power to heal the wound. Regina was shocked to realize that not only the Layla family's relic, but even the Elgiwa family's eye of prophecy had gone missing exactly 12 years ago. A dreadful silence settled over Owen, who seemed to be pursuing his own private train of thought. He found it absurd and was left speechless that the heads of the transcendent families couldn't even protect their own relics. Regina reasoned that based on the matching timeline, it seemed only a single person was behind all of these thefts. The emperor sat quietly observing the debate and asked whether anyone could think of this name. Back with Rosianne, the mysterious woman was still continuing the conversation about the girl's identity. She called her by her full name, Rosianne Winiak, making the girl flinch in surprise. Rosianne awkwardly explained that she had no intention of deceiving anyone or any ill will in disguising herself like this. The girl secretly counted herself lucky that even the emperor hadn't recognized her, but never expected the star relic could see through everything. The mysterious woman teased Rosianne as a smooth-talking child and pointed out that she wasn't even a member of the Winiak family officially. She raised her voice and scolded Rosianne for daring to stand here speaking while her body gave off the manhwa scent of a different transcendent family. Rosianne was terrified, wondering whether the woman had recognized at first glance that she was a reincarnated soul. The girl tried to calm herself and insisted that, whatever the case, she was currently a part of the Winiak family. The mysterious woman waved off all her excuses and told the girl there was no need to explain anything further. She laid out a condition that if Rosianne wanted to earn her affection, she would have to do one thing. The woman's strange demand was that Rosianne bring her a truly handsome man. Rosianne was utterly bewildered, not understanding why such a powerful entity would make such a bizarre request. The woman calmly declared, plainly, that she was extremely fond of men with beautiful looks. Rosianne was so shocked she froze, realizing the true reason behind this harem of handsome men was to indulge the star relic's preferences. However, the girl quickly realized this might be a good opportunity to turn the situation around. The little girl immediately declared that she knew an exceedingly handsome man and would bring him here. The mysterious woman seemed intrigued and asked again whether the girl really knew such a peerless beauty. With sparkling eyes, Rosianne promised to bring a man so beautiful he could shine brilliantly even when viewed from outer space. Back at the estate, the emperor lamented being unable to find any clue or culprit over the past 12 years. Dorian of the Layla family begged everyone to join forces to recover his family's lost relic. He promised that if the crystal were found, he would allow all the transcendent families to use it without limit. Family head Owen of the Winiak family agreed to fully cooperate, since he too needed it to heal Kronos' eyes. The emperor assigned the Fidel and Kilges families to handle the investigation of clues within the empire. Owen also took on the responsibility of personally investigating in the kingdom of Abbey to track down the relic. Dorian was deeply moved and offered his heartfelt thanks to everyone who had agreed to help him. Regina still couldn't stop fretting over the simultaneous disappearance of the relics 12 years ago. She discreetly glanced at Kalian, who sat quietly through the meeting with a deeply mysterious air. Regina wondered whether there was some connection between the death of the talented disciple years ago and the appearance of the Winiak child now. She suspected that some form of mind-altering magic or high-level curse had been used to conceal the truth. Deep down, Regina knew that only one person had the ability to perform such terrifying magic. She recalled how the Winiak child's mana bore the distinctive traits of the Kilges family, which left her full of doubt. Regina felt shaken by the uncanny resemblance between the present child and the disciple she had once cherished. And yet the plain fact was that the talented child had died in the war for the position of family head 12 years ago. She wondered whether it was truly possible for someone who had died to return to life. Her train of thought was cut short by the sound of Rosianne's name being called from afar. The door of the secret chamber opened, and the emperor stepped out with Rosianne after the meeting with the relic. The young king eagerly asked how the meeting between Anne and the relic had gone. Rosianne deliberately feigned anger and turned the question around, asking the emperor whether he had anything to confess to her. The emperor bowed his head in apology for deceiving the girl, explaining that he had to gather many handsome men to appease the relic, but in the end still needed the power of the Winiak family. Rosianne asked what he would do if she told family head Owen about all this, since he surely would not let the matter rest. The emperor grew anxious at the girl's threat, while Rosianne privately cursed him as a pervert, even though the relic was the one with that particular taste. The little girl pressed him on why he had to hide the existence of the star relic from everyone. He admitted that if Owen learned his family's relic was imprisoned here, he would surely fly into a rage. The emperor recounted that at first he had seen this as a great opportunity for the empire, but soon realized how dangerous it was. He discovered that the Great Annihilation possessed an immense power utterly unlike the other relics, capable of wiping out all existence. That truth filled him with fear at the prospect of such power being abused. He dreaded that the balance among the transcendent families would collapse, and a devastating continental war would break out once more. Rosianne listened and admitted that the Emperor's explanations did have some merit. However, she still wondered why he had deliberately tried to approach and lure Kalyan along from the very start. The Emperor explained that, having heard Kalyan was gentle in nature, he thought he would be the most suitable person to reconcile with the relic. He expressed sincere regret for deceiving the girl and hoped to earn her understanding. Rosianne regarded him with a scrutinizing gaze, though she seemed to have begun believing his confession. In the end, the little girl decided not to tell her father about this, understanding that adults always have their own private burdens and difficult circumstances. The Emperor offered his thanks for Anne's understanding. He even told the girl that from now on she could feel free to call him uncle, which left her frozen in surprise. Since night had fallen, the young king invited the entire Winiac family to stay and rest at the royal palace. He wondered why the sacred chamber had grown so unusually quiet after the girl entered, and asked himself whether the relic had truly taken a special liking to her. In another development, Rosianne, in her true form, was sneaking into action. The little girl signaled to someone to stay quiet to avoid being discovered. Though she had promised her father she wouldn't interfere, Rosianne insisted she couldn't stay out of anything involving a star relic. The scene rewound to 6 hours earlier in the magnificent palace. Kalyan pressed her on whether the relic was really there. Rosianne confirmed it and even teased that it was utterly obsessed with handsome men. The little girl privately praised her own information-gathering skills, achieved merely by sitting in on the meeting. Rosianne confessed to Kalyan that she had carelessly promised to bring him to meet the relic. The little girl thought to herself that since it was a Winiac treasure, it was only natural that Kalyan become its owner. Rosianne smiled with calculation, believing that if the relic chose Kalyan, not even the Empire could stop it. The two decided to sneak there together under the cover of night. Kalyan looked toward the door and recognized it as his target. Seeing her brother seemed tense, Rosianne gently asked after him. The little girl patted his head and reassured Kalyan that the relic would surely adore him, so there was nothing to worry about. With a radiant expression, Rosianne urged her brother to step inside together. Kalyan smiled and thanked his sister as the two of them placed their hands on the glowing door. At that same moment, in a gloomy cemetery, a blue-haired man and Regina were stunned to discover a horrifying truth. Rosietti's body had vanished without a trace from its coffin. The blue-haired man was deeply puzzled, for bones could not turn to dust in a mere 12 years. Moreover, the coffin showed no sign of having been pried open recently. Regina confirmed his suspicion with a silent nod. They concluded that someone had stolen Rosietti's body long ago. Regina fell into silent contemplation, unable to find words before such a shocking turn of events. The blue-haired man pounded the coffin in fury, unable to comprehend who could so cruelly desecrate the dead. His eyes flashed with a cold glint as he pieced the events together. He realized that Rosietti had died in the very year the resurrection crystal was stolen. Though not yet certain, Regina believed there was an intimate connection between the two incidents. She still didn't understand the true purpose of whoever was behind these schemes. Regina thought back on Rosietti, the once-in-a-century genius of her family. The coincidence of the crystal's theft and the missing body left her deep in thought. The sudden appearance of a child who looked exactly like Rosietti left her even more suspicious. Regina could not believe all of this was mere coincidence. She clenched her fists and told herself she absolutely had to find a way to confirm that child's identity. Regina wondered whether that little one could truly be Rosietti returned. All of a sudden, an enormous surge of mana erupted, startling them both. They sensed an extreme source of energy radiating from the sacred chamber. The two looked toward the palace, which was bathed in a strange light. Back in the sacred chamber, the relic entity was terrified at the one Rosianne had brought. Rosianne innocently reminded it that she had kept her promise to bring an exquisite man. The relic furiously ordered them to get out at once, for she smelled an unpleasant scent. She recognized the presence of chaos and ruin surrounding Kalyan. Rosianne clenched her fists in frustration at hearing such unkind words. The little girl demanded to know how the woman dared use that tone to speak of her brother. Rosianne could not accept her wonderful brother being insulted. Kalyan, meanwhile, wore an eerie smile as darkness began to engulf him. Roseanne was bewildered, not understanding what was happening to her brother. Kalian stamped his foot and declared that he had finally found it. He lunged to seize the relic sword floating in the air, to the entity's shock. She clicked her tongue in displeasure as Kalian touched her. A blinding light flared up as Kalian gripped the hilt. Roseanne cried out her brother's name in panic at the terrifying sight. The little girl was deeply frightened by the strange expression on Kalian's face. Kalian's hand was fiercely scorched by the relic's energy. Despite the pain, he refused to let go and only gripped tighter. Kalian coldly told the relic not to waste its effort resisting, for in the end it would belong to him. The relic entity declared she would rather vanish than offer her body to one such as him. Roseanne was at a loss for what to do in this chaotic situation. The little girl feared that at this rate her brother's life would be in danger. What's more, Roseanne noticed that Kalian was behaving extremely strangely today. This was not at all the gentle brother she had once known. The relic entity mocked his intention to deceive even the stars. She called out the name of the dark entity, chaos and ruin dwelling within Kalian. The dark entity told the relic to mind its mouth, saying it was nothing more than dust born from stardust. It ordered the relic to be silent and submit to its new master. Roseanne immediately rushed to embrace Kalian and begged him to calm down. The little girl anxiously asked whether something terrible had happened to him. Kalian paused and softly called the name Josie when he saw his sister. The relic sword suddenly scolded Roseanne as a lying little brat. Roseanne was bewildered, not understanding why she was being accused like this. A burst of light flung the girl far away amid a terrified scream. Kalian was also struck by the shock and collapsed to the floor. Roseanne hurriedly ran over to support her brother. The sword hovered right before the girl's face and declared that she had deceived it twice. It announced that Roseanne would pay a heavy price for this act of deception. Roseanne hurriedly pleaded with the relic to wait a moment so she could explain. The little girl insisted she had truly brought an exceedingly beautiful young man as requested. Roseanne argued that if Kalian's beauty still wasn't enough, then no one else on this planet could ever satisfy it. The relic flew into a rage and shrieked that what she cared about was not his face. She demanded the girl look closely at the dark aura swirling around Kalian. Roseanne was stunned to realize a horrifying truth she had never been aware of all this time. The little girl wondered whether it was this very darkness that had driven her brother to such madness. The relic entity decided to place her trust in this child once more. She proposed that Roseanne form a pact with her to use that power to purify Kalian. Roseanne was greatly surprised to learn she would have to become the true owner of the star relic. The little girl looked anxiously at Kalian, still sunk in a stupor with no sign of waking soon. Though she had originally intended to give this position to her brother, she now had no other choice. Roseanne resolved that she had to first rid Kalian of the suspicious darkness clinging to him. The little girl bravely raised the sword and borrowed the relic's power. The relic praised this as a wise choice as it formally acknowledged her. Roseanne was astonished by the true form of the Great Annihilation and felt the power of the stars surging within her. With this energy, the little girl was certain she could return her brother to normal. Roseanne used magic to bind Kalian's hands. Kalian was startled to find himself restrained and looked at his sister with a questioning gaze. Roseanne declared that once they returned home, her brother would absolutely have to undergo a special mental training course. Kalian could only stammer the name Josie in his daze. The dark entity within him mocked the fact that he had allowed himself to be fooled by such a childish trick. Roseanne complained that it was precisely because Kalian kept doing strange things that people gossiped about him so. The little girl struggled to use the star relic to purify the black aura enveloping Kalian and told him to endure, for it was almost over. After the black smoke vanished, Roseanne breathed a sigh of relief that she had finally dealt with that dreadful thing. She told her brother he could now rest at ease, but Kalian's face still wore a dazed look. In an instant, Kalian collapsed to the floor from exhaustion. Roseanne cried out in alarm for her brother when she saw him suddenly faint. At the palace, a voice full of authority rang out, condemning whoever had stolen another family's treasure and nearly caused a catastrophe. Family head Owen of the Winiak family was furious and demanded the emperor give a satisfactory explanation for everything. The emperor apologized for keeping this secret and urged Owen to calm down, but Owen insisted he was already exercising great restraint after all that had happened. Owen declared that since the Great Annihilation Relic had officially accepted his daughter as its owner, this treasure now belonged to the Winiak family. He stressed that he would accept no objections, leaving the Emperor with no choice but to hold his tongue. Owen suddenly called out Roseanne's name, making the girl flinch and obediently answer. He ordered the girl to later explain in full detail why Kalyan had fallen into such a terrible state. Roseanne anxiously agreed, sweat pouring down as she feared her father's anger. After Owen told her to go rest, Roseanne stood alone in a daze before her room. The little girl wondered whether her father was truly not angry about her sneaking into the sacred chamber. But above all, what Roseanne wanted most right now was to run and check on her brother. The spirit of the sword suddenly appeared and shouted, demanding she take it to Kalyan at once, for it could not let this matter go. Roseanne wondered why the darkness had vanished, yet the relic's spirit remained on such high alert. While Kalyan lay recovering, a dark entity in the form of a black snake mocked him for being so weak before that little girl. It even came up with the idea of killing Roseanne with its own hands, making Kalyan suddenly open his eyes and wake. Kalyan sat bolt upright and coldly dared the dark snake to try touching the girl. He looked straight into the eyes of the Chaos and Ruin serpent and warned that if it dared do so, it too would not be safe. Roseanne was still deeply confused, not understanding what the name Chaos and Ruin actually meant. The relic spirit explained that the name symbolized the end of all things in the world. She declared it to be the gathering of all that was unlucky and evil in the universe, which left Roseanne very uneasy. The relic said she had only temporarily driven it off, for such a thing could not die so easily. It was surely lurking somewhere, waiting for its next chance to return. The appearance of this entity meant that a wave of horrifying chaos was about to descend. The relic reminded Roseanne to always keep her mind sharp and alert to deal with this looming threat. Roseanne suggested that if it was so dangerous, the two of them should take the initiative to find and destroy it at once. The relic agreed, but first she had another matter she wanted to attend to. She recalled the brawny young men of the Fidel family training so eagerly on the drill grounds. Roseanne was left speechless upon realizing this relic really just wanted to go back there to ogle handsome men. The little girl pondered over that bizarre entity and wondered why a relic as powerful as the woman had to be so wary of it. Roseanne couldn't understand why something so terrifying kept chasing after Kalyan all this time. Though she didn't yet know its true purpose regarding her brother, her heart was full of worry. The little girl resolved that if it dared come near her brother again, she would absolutely not let it escape. Kalyan was still in his room and seemed to be struggling to keep his mind free of strange thoughts. The dark serpent reasoned that since the relic had chosen Roseanne, the stars had surely begun to take notice of their presence. It sneered at Kalyan. Kalyan was someone all talk and little action who in reality could accomplish very little. The serpent reminded him how he had nearly died, and Kalyan admitted that the two of them were now tightly bound together in this mess. It emphasized that Kalyan was it and it was Kalyan inseparable. That meant if Kalyan suffered a fatal blow, the serpent would feel the effects as well. It warned him to be careful and not let anything force it to lay a hand on that girl, Roseanne. Kalyan calmly dismissed it, trusting that his sister was more than capable of protecting herself, which infuriated the serpent. It began to regret having chosen someone like him as its host. The serpent wondered whether it was wise to let Roseanne keep the relic sword, while she still hadn't fully mastered it. Kalyan insisted that once a relic chose its owner, there was nothing they could do but accept it. He even felt that the treasure belonging to Roseanne was a perfectly fitting thing. Kalyan found it intriguing that his princess might be the only one capable of killing them. He believed Roseanne was the only person in the world who would always love and strive to protect him at any cost. The dark entity wondered whether the girl would still feel the same if she saw his true face. A knock at the door cut through the thoughts of the two within the room. A maid entered the room with a timid, anxious expression. She announced that she had brought hot tea by the family head's order to serve the heir. As the maid fumbled to prepare it, Kalyan watched silently with a cold gaze. Noticing his opponent trembling, Kalyan asked whether she was feeling afraid in his presence. He coldly warned her to be careful not to break the dishes through her own carelessness. The maid bowed her head in fearful apology, not daring to look up. Kalyan told her to just leave the tea there and quickly get out of his sight. The moment she left, the maid privately lamented that the rumors of Kalyan's frightfulness were not wrong at all, while Roseanne was already waiting outside. Roseanne poked her head into the room and gently asked whether her brother had woken up. Kalyan's face immediately lit up the moment he saw his sister, and he softly called her name. Roseanne tenderly asked after his health and advised him not to overexert himself but to focus on resting until he fully recovered. She meant to bring up what had happened in the sacred chamber but quickly apologized, afraid of tiring him further. Kalian admitted that his memory of the incident was now very vague and fragmented. Roseanne immediately reassured him that there was no need to force himself to recall such unpleasant matters. She privately thought about how the chaos and ruin entity must have tormented her brother greatly, causing him such pain. Seeing his sister muttering to herself, Kalian curiously asked what she had just said. Roseanne suddenly realized her brother seemed to remember nothing about the dark entity, and worried that learning the truth would deeply shock him. The little girl quickly changed the subject, saying it was nothing, and urged him to recover soon so the whole family could return home. Kalian smiled in agreement, though his heart still held many unspoken worries. Looking at his pale face, Roseanne felt deeply pained and concerned for his already frail body. The little girl earnestly told Kalian that she had thought very carefully about an important matter. Roseanne proposed that as soon as they returned to the kingdom, the two of them would go and seek out a special elixir of immortality. Kalian was greatly surprised to hear such a term from his sister's mouth. Roseanne explained that lately his star fever had been flaring up more and more frequently, while he was nearing the age of adulthood. She felt that from now on he needed to learn to stabilize his own mana rather than always relying on her lullabies. Roseanne believed this elixir would help him stabilize both body and mind so he could protect himself against that dark entity. The little girl even eagerly asked what form of jewelry he'd like the elixir crafted into, such as a ring or a necklace. Kalian gently replied that as long as he had Roseanne by his side, that alone was more than enough for him. He affirmed that her presence was the only thing he truly needed right now. Hearing such affectionate words, Roseanne softly called her brother's name with a thoughtful look. Right afterward, the little girl grew cross, accusing him of not listening to her, and stressed that he truly needed the elixir right now. Kalian suddenly broke into a playful smile and asked why Roseanne didn't simply become that elixir for him herself. Roseanne flatly refused, leaving Kalian deeply disappointed and wondering why. She explained that turning a person into a vessel for channeling energy carried far too many needless risks. They couldn't be together every single moment, and if the one made into the elixir died first, the other would have to live in suffering for the rest of their life. Kalian pensively admitted that his sister's analysis was entirely sound. Roseanne said she had researched this matter very thoroughly and knew of many examples of tragic outcomes throughout history. Kalian smiled and said she too would soon need an elixir of her own, so the two of them should just become elixirs for each other. Roseanne thought to herself that her brother had suddenly grown oddly stubborn today and couldn't understand why he was making such a bizarre suggestion. The little girl blushed as she imagined how only couples who pledged themselves to each other for life did such things. Roseanne earnestly placed a hand on Kalian's shoulder and called his name clearly. She firmly affirmed that this was not something people of the same family should do for one another. Kalian could only repeat the word family with a deeply disappointed expression at his sister's declaration. Roseanne worried whether she had misspoken and upset her brother, but she hoped he would understand her feelings. The little girl told herself that the moment they returned, she absolutely had to find an elixir for Kalian before it was too late. Roseanne was sitting in a magnificent room at the royal palace. There came a knock at the door, and a servant announced that the family head was summoning her. Roseanne immediately responded and prepared to go out. The little girl thought to herself that the important moment had finally arrived. Roseanne recalled her father's words that she would have to give a detailed account of Kalian's condition, and she felt terribly afraid she would be scolded. The little girl reassured herself that she only needed to tell the truth, and was surprised to find the other family heads present as well. Roseanne politely offered a good morning to everyone in the room. Family head Dorian Layla merely stared at the girl in silence with a cold, inscrutable gaze. Roseanne felt uncomfortable at being ignored and wondered why they were looking at her with such grim, irritated faces. The little girl decided to quickly move along to find family head Owen and escape this stifling atmosphere. Roseanne spotted Owen standing out on the balcony and hurried to call his name. Owen turned and gently greeted his little daughter in return. He immediately asked whether she had brought the Great Annihilation relic back safely. Her father's sudden question made Roseanne flinch in surprise. She hesitantly revealed that everything was currently at the Fidel family's training grounds. Hearing this, her father couldn't help but wonder why it was there. Seeing him grow suspicious, The girl could only stammer and play dumb to cover the truth that she had sneaked there merely to admire the knight's muscles. Owen spoke directly to the heart of the matter, asserting that she surely understood why she had been summoned. With a stern expression, he demanded an honest account of everything that had happened the day before. The little girl stood pondering in contemplation for a while before continuing the conversation. Owen brought up how she had used the relic to purify the chaos and ruin entity from her brother. He worriedly asked whether that thing had caused her any harm, and Roseanne confirmed she was fine. The little girl further explained that its true target was Callion, not her. Owen breathed a sigh of relief to see that both of his children were safe and sound. However, he then muttered that he wouldn't mind if that boy Callion just kept on sleeping a while longer. Roseanne asked what her father had just said, but he calmly replied that it was nothing. The little girl was certain that the darkness had taken advantage of Callion's weakened state during the star fever to attack him. With a determined look, Roseanne vowed that next time, if she met it again, she would surely teach it a lesson it would never forget. Owen smiled and patted her head, praising the girl as a truly reliable pillar of support and expressing his satisfaction that she had been chosen by the relic. However, he privately understood that not everyone would be pleased about it. Owen explained that since she was now the owner of that sword, the other families would begin to be wary of her and seek to keep her in check. Roseanne suddenly realized that this was why the family heads earlier had looked at her with such scrutinizing eyes. Owen affirmed that no matter who the enemy was, the Winiak family would protect her above all else. He gently told her not to worry at all, which made Roseanne feel greatly at ease. Roseanne looked at her father with wide, deeply moved eyes. The little girl smiled radiantly and obeyed her father most obediently. Roseanne skipped along and thought to herself that she truly wasn't afraid in the slightest. The little girl was overjoyed to feel the love and deep care from family head Owen. Lost in thought, Roseanne suddenly slammed into the chest of an unfamiliar man. The hard collision left the girl dizzy, and she hurriedly offered an apology. But the moment she saw the man's face clearly, Roseanne froze in utter astonishment. The man kindly extended a hand and asked whether the girl was hurt anywhere. He politely took the blame upon himself for not watching where he was going. Roseanne trembled, her breathing growing rapid as a fear from the past suddenly came flooding back. The little girl realized in horror that the man smiling before her was the very one who had murdered her 12 years ago. Her memory carried her back to the brutal war for the position of head of the Kilgess family years ago. Back then, everyone had been buzzing that Anfian was the strongest candidate for the position. However, Rosietti, bearing the title of the Rose Princess, was also a formidable rival. She had been an outstanding magical genius whom everyone could only admire. At the decisive moment, Anfian declared this to be her end, yet Rosietti remained utterly unshaken. She had once believed an attack like that was nothing against her power. But she was shocked to see blood begin to flow from her mouth as her body slowly gave way. Rosietti realized she had been struck by a deadly, insidious curse and couldn't understand why her opponent was so ruthless. In her eyes at that moment, Anfian was truly a cold and merciless man. She had died in bitter anguish as she watched his figure standing proudly upon the dais of glory. That man was none other than Anfian Kilgess, the current heir of the distinguished Kilgess family. Anfian was still looking at her with a gentle smile like a true gentleman. Rosietti recalled that the first piece of news she had heard after her reincarnation was that he had smoothly secured the position of family head. The girl clenched her fists in resentment at how he had used filthy schemes to seize that position. Seeing the girl staring at him, Anfian softly voiced his curiosity. Roseanne suddenly noticed the necklace around his neck and was astonished to recognize it as her own former treasure. Anfian asked whether the girl knew what this item was, and Roseanne awkwardly denied it, only praising how beautiful it was. He introduced it as the planetarium, a treasure that every member of the Kilgess family carried with them. Anfian added that perhaps a child of the Winiak family could never understand its true value. Roseanne privately cursed him as arrogant, for it was in fact the very item she had used throughout her past life. The girl, choked with bitterness, wondered how he could so casually wear the belonging of the very person he had killed. Anfian noticed her attention and curiously asked whether she was truly interested in it. He generously held the necklace out before Roseanne and told her to feel free to touch it. Roseanne trembled and raised her hand amid the turmoil of her mind at the sight of her old possession. However, her hand suddenly froze right before touching that glittering crystal. She realized that if she touched it, The mana of its former owner might activate it and expose her true identity. Roseanne quickly withdrew her hand and declined, using the excuse that she would wait for another chance to witness his magic. Anfine smiled politely and apologized for taking up the girl's time. He bid her farewell and promised to meet again another time as the two of them turned and walked their separate ways. Roseanne silently called out the name of her treasure with a heart full of bitter anguish. The little girl resolved that she would soon find a way to reclaim what rightfully belonged to her from the hands of that killer. With a fierce yearning for power, Roseanne swore she would carry out this revenge with her own two hands. Anfine stepped into a private room where the other family heads were already waiting. The lady head of the Kilguess family immediately asked how the recent meeting had gone. Anfine confirmed everything had gone as predicted and that the girl had reacted strongly upon seeing the necklace. She affirmed that, based on that reaction, the Winiac child was very likely the soul of Rosietti. She turned to ask the other family heads what they intended to do next in this situation. Family head Owen kept his composed expression, prompting her to exclaim her astonishment at such an unbelievable tale. She revealed that the reason she had summoned everyone was her suspicion that the resurrection crystal relic lay within the child's body. Dorian Layla admitted that at first he too had thought it utterly impossible. However, he himself had sensed the distinctive power of the crystal emanating from the girl Roseanne. He angrily demanded whether Owen truly knew about this earth-shaking secret. Dorian expressed his concern, unable to understand what Owen was truly scheming. He stressed that another equally grave matter was the fact that the girl had become the owner of the Great Annihilation. This meant the Winiac family now held two relics, upsetting the balance of power, and they absolutely had to reclaim it. Distinct footsteps rang out, making everyone in the room turn their heads to look. Owen Winiac suddenly appeared, startling both the lady head of the Kilguess family and Dorian. He calmly mocked that everyone seemed to be having quite a pleasant discussion without his presence. Dorian immediately demanded whether Owen truly knew about the secret surrounding the child of his own house. He brought up that Roseanne had been resurrected using the stolen resurrection crystal relic of the Layla family. Owen realized the situation was turning grim upon seeing how far his opponent's investigation had gone. Nevertheless, he kept his cold expression and calmly said he had no idea what they were talking about. Dorian flew into a rage, shouting that playing dumb was useless, and threatened to dissect the girl's body to recover the treasure. Owen immediately glared in warning that if anyone dared lay a hand on that child, the Winiac family would not let it stand. A dreadful silence fell over the two family heads as they faced the killing intent radiating from Owen. The lady head of the Kilguess family spoke up to remind everyone that the Great Annihilation was the most dangerous treasure among all the relics. She looked at the blazing sword and asked whether Owen could guarantee the Winiac family would not betray the alliance. With such terrifyingly destructive power in their hands, their loyalty was something everyone worried about. Owen furrowed his brow and asked what his opponent was implying. Regina Kilguess suddenly demanded that Owen hand over Roseanne Winiac to her. She wished to take the girl back to the Empire, while Roseanne kept smiling radiantly as if completely unaware of what was unfolding. Owen was stunned and repeated her demand to hand over his daughter. Regina hastily clarified that she had no intention of driving the girl out of her home entirely. She proposed that each year the girl would travel back and forth between the Delphian Empire and the Kingdom of Abbey. Owen vehemently objected, saying such an arrangement was in the end no different from making the girl a hostage. Dorian of the Layla family stressed that Roseanne now not only wielded the Great Annihilation, but also carried the Layla family's relic within her. He asserted that the families had the right to manage the girl until the resurrection crystal was recovered. Dorian even applied pressure by asking whether Owen truly wished to stand against all the other transcendent families. Under that pressure, Owen suggested everyone ask the opinion of the person at the center of it all, Roseanne herself. He declared that he would respect and abide by whatever the girl wished. Kalian watched from afar and began recalling old memories tied to a certain woman. He remembered a time as a child when he had fallen and a beautiful woman had approached, asking whether he was all right. Back then, she had saved him from a wild boar, leaving him utterly flustered as he asked who she was. That woman had gently introduced herself as Rosietti. Adolphe Rosietti had smiled and greeted the young boy Kalian in a setting full of roses. Kalian thought to himself how he had once believed she had died in the war for the position of family head, never dreaming he would see her again. He was stunned to see her return in the body of a child and couldn't comprehend how she had been resurrected. He sensed that everyone around them now was an enemy, especially that Anfian, the one who clung so closely to the girl, whom Kalyan judged to be the most dangerous of all. Kalyan came up with the thought that letting her stay in the Empire away from him might actually be the safer choice for Rosietti. He clenched his fists, recalling how she had once saved his life in the past. He told himself the time had now come for him to stand and protect that girl. Rosianne was greatly astonished to hear that the Empire suddenly wanted to keep her. She wondered whether the reason was that she had awakened the Great Annihilation, and Owen confirmed it. Owen explained that the other family heads were deeply displeased to see her become the owner of a star relic. He privately thought it best not to reveal to the girl that they had discovered the resurrection crystal within her. Owen was certain Rosianne had no idea such a thing existed inside her own body. Looking at his little daughter, Owen lamented that she was, in truth, still far too young. He said the Fidel family where they were staying would ensure her a home and absolute safety. He asked Rosianne what she truly wished to do and affirmed that everyone had agreed to respect her will above all. All of a sudden, Kalyan burst into the room and shouted that such a thing would absolutely never happen. He was utterly shocked at the idea of leaving Josie in the Empire, despite the girl's pleas that he still couldn't move about strenuously. Kalyan demanded to stay in the Empire with the girl, forcing Owen to speak up in reproach. Owen explained that transcendent entities were not permitted to leave their territory without authorization, and they were making an exception only for Rosianne. Kalyan ignored all rules and exceptions, declaring that even his father's words meant nothing to him right now. He firmly insisted that he would never hand Rosianne over to anyone. Rosianne stood stunned by her brother's fierce reaction and protectiveness. The little girl realized that if she didn't comply with the family heads, this matter could escalate into a terrible international conflict. Though Kalyan tried to reassure her that she needn't worry, Rosianne asked him to wait a moment. Kalyan's face showed clear shock as his sister spoke up to cut him off. The two stood facing each other in a tense atmosphere under Owen's watchful gaze. Rosianne clearly declared that she had decided to come to the Empire once a year. This decision left Kalyan utterly frozen, feeling as though he had been struck by lightning. He looked at her with eyes full of pain and disappointment. Owen accepted this proposal and said he would personally discuss it again with the other family heads. Kalyan fled outside in bitter frustration, with Rosianne's worried calls trailing after him. That night, beneath the full bright moon, Rosianne wandered the garden in search of her brother. The little girl walked along calling his name, hoping he hadn't gone too far. At last she found Kalyan sitting curled up in a lonely corner on the stone steps. Rosianne gently asked whether he truly didn't want to speak with her anymore. She urged him not to sulk like this and to cheer up. Kalyan suddenly turned his face to reveal tears streaming down his cheeks, making the moment seem to freeze. Rosianne was utterly alarmed to see her brother actually crying. In a choked voice, Kalyan asked once more whether she truly wished to stay in this place. Rosianne awkwardly reminded him that she had already promised to do so. Kalyan bitterly asked why she would choose to do such a thing. He gripped his sister's hand tightly and reminded her of her promise to always stay by his side. Rosianne looked at him and silently wondered to herself why things had turned out this way. The little girl recalled her true identity as a member of the Kilguess family, even though she had now been reborn as Rosianne Winiak. She calculated that by the time Kalyan came of age, her own power would be restored to what it had been in her past life. By then, she would return to the Kilguess family to expose the entire truth about her unjust death. Rosianne nursed her resolve to reclaim everything that rightfully belonged to her from the hands of the one who had so cruelly murdered her years ago. But she knew well that these secrets were something she could never clearly explain to Kalyan. The little girl softly called her brother's name with great tenderness. Rosianne affirmed that Kalyan was the only true family she had right now. Seeing him so heartbroken, her own heart ached terribly as well. Kalyan, choking back tears, proposed that the two of them return home together at once. Rosianne tried to explain that she wasn't leaving for good but would return to the kingdom often, so there was nothing to worry about. But to Kalyan, being apart from his sister even half the time was an extremely serious matter. He cried out that the Empire was trying to steal half of her life away from him. Kalyan confessed something important, that he simply could not live without the little girl. He knelt down in anguish, took her hand, and asked whether she could really live well without him. Rosianne was stunned to realize that the love Kalyan held for her was even greater than she had ever imagined. Seeing her brother so despairing, his head bowed low, the little girl felt anything but at ease. Kalian, on the verge of tears, said that he had been blessed with a kind older brother and a wonderful family head as well. Rosianne smiled and asked whether the kingdom of Abby was truly better, hoping to soothe his mood. Deep in her heart, she always remembered that she belonged to the Kilgus family in her past life. It was a place full of brutal rivalry, one she felt no attachment to whatsoever. The little girl told herself that the only true family she had now was her brother and her father Owen. To comfort him, Rosianne offered to grant him any one wish. The little girl eagerly affirmed that she would agree to anything she was able to do. Kalian gripped her hand tightly and decided to save that wish for some other occasion later on. He asked his sister to promise him right here and now, in the name of the Star of Winiak. Rosianne smiled radiantly and affirmed that she understood his wish clearly. The little girl solemnly declared that she, Rosianne Winiak, would grant one wish of her brother's. Beneath a sky full of magnificent blossoms, the little girl sincerely made her vow in the name of the Star of Winiak. The two exchanged a warm look and a smile that bound their sibling bond deeply. From that day on, the girl's life of traveling back and forth each year between the Empire and the Kingdom officially began. Everything went rather peacefully, far better than she had ever expected in the Delphian Empire. Rosianne recalled that in her past life as Rosietti, the only teacher she had truly admired from the bottom of her heart was Regina. Now she had the chance to officially meet that lady head once more under a new identity. Rosianne was overjoyed and expressed her wish to work alongside her throughout her time in the Empire. Gazing at her old teacher, the girl's eyes shimmered as she silently called her master with deep emotion. She silently begged her to forgive her, for she could not reveal her true identity at present. As time slipped by, the girl had turned 16 in all her splendor right there in the Delphian Empire. But the memory of the moment Amphion murdered her years ago still lingered vividly, like a reminder of Rosietti's end. The memory of that brutal death from years past returned to her mind, with haunting smears of blood. In her dying moments, she had bitterly demanded of Amphion how he could treat her so cruelly. Rosianne jolted awake from the nightmare, drenched in sweat and still shaken by the blazing red eyes from her dream. The little girl wondered in a daze whether that had truly been a memory of the moment she died in her past life. Rosianne felt anxious, for lately these dreams of her death had been recurring with increasing frequency. The voice of the great Annihilation Relic's spirit rang out, announcing that the girl had finally deigned to wake. She remarked that Rosianne looked as though she had just been through a horrifying nightmare, so she had hesitated over whether to wake her. Rosianne thought to herself that just knowing the woman had such good intentions was enough, while the relic urged her to hurry and snap out of it. The relic eagerly announced that the moment she got up, the two of them would go to the training grounds together. Rosianne couldn't help but be surprised that it was still so early. The relic's spirit admitted she never tired of gazing upon the strapping bodies of the knights, making Rosianne think to herself that the woman's personality hadn't changed in the slightest. At the Fidel family's training grounds, the knights were drilling eagerly under the morning sun. Rosianne poked her head out and cheerfully waved to greet Luis with a radiant expression. Luis immediately reminded the girl not to call out his name so loudly in such a crowded place. Rosianne smiled at him and suddenly realized a truth she had never noticed before. She recalled that Luis was the very boy she had been so close to in her past life as Rosietti. Back then, he had been much smaller than her, and had even openly declared that Rosietti was his betrothed by his father's arrangement. Rosianne marveled that, compared to her brother or Luis, men really did grow up astonishingly fast, while he asked whether she was even listening to him. Luis kept his cold demeanor and reminded Rosianne not to frequent places like this so often, since she was no longer a child. Rather than shrinking back at his rejection, she looked him in the eye and firmly declared that she was here to carry out the great annihilation. At the girl's resolute declaration, Luis kept his icy expression, unfazed as if nothing had happened. Even while holding both powerful relics, the great annihilation and the resurrection crystal, Rosianne wondered whether she was being far too careless about the dangers lurking around her. The fact was that Dorian Layla was scheming to dissect her to recover the treasure, and the old man was patiently waiting for the right opportunity to strike. For this reason, Rosianne had been continually sending letters and meeting with the Emperor to discuss matters of great importance. The little girl repeatedly implored the young king to find a way to keep the Layla family from approaching her in the Empire. Luis fretted over how much longer he could hold the old man at bay, while Rosianne was busy being captivated by a little butterfly. He sighed in exasperation at the girl, who had not the slightest sense of the danger looming so close, busy only admiring how lovely the butterfly was. Louise silently wondered whether the girl truly had no idea that the resurrection crystal lay right inside her own body. Rosie unhappily thought that in just a few more days, it would be time to return to the kingdom to see her father, Owen, and her brother. The little girl smiled with joy, wondering what her brother Callian was doing back home right then. Rosie-Ann secretly hoped he wasn't sitting and sobbing all alone out of missing her too much. Night fell over an ancient castle, accompanied by a piercing scream demanding that someone stay away. A poor man was being strangled by a stream of dark aura and managed only to call his attacker a monster. Cries of agony echoed through the dark, blood-scented air. Callian stood there with blood streaking his face, his eyes turned cold and merciless, utterly unlike his usual gentle self.